So far, we have been talking about discretionary access control, where the owner of a resource decides what accesses different users should have. Now we are going to talk about a different model called mandatory access control, where the access permissions are not really under the control of an owner, right? So why do we think about MAC and not DAC, right? And keep in mind that DAC is what is widely deployed and the only mechanism that most of you are probably familiar with. But it does have some drawbacks. And the first drawback is sometimes called the Trojan horse problem. Okay. So the Trojan horse problem basically means that so the idea is that in a discretionary access control mechanism, if you run a process, then the process gets all of your permissions, which means that if the process is malicious and it does something bad, then it still has all of your privileges, and therefore it can abuse those privileges. And this is sort of what we refer to as Trojan horse, because this is something that although it has your privileges, it's what it does is not entirely under your control, and therefore you cannot really vouch for it. So that's one of the biggest problems. And so this is why, for instance, if we download something from some random place and run it, the security of our computer is compromised, because this program can do something arbitrary on your system. And this arbitrary thing is anything that you yourself have the privilege to do. Okay, so there is also a secondary problem, which is that if the resource owner didn't really bother to set the permissions correctly, then what's going to happen then is that once again the protection is going to be minimal or non-existent. Okay, so as a result, in the mandatory access control model, what it does is that it hands over the control of privilege to a central point, or typically the system administrator. So if you have an organization, the organization may want to make sure that its security policies and security concerns are addressed, even if individual users are not actually very careful. Okay, so this is why you move the access control to a central point. Okay, and that's what MAC is all about. So MAC is sort of a general umbrella term for access control mechanisms that are centralized. But let's look at some specific examples of mandatory access control. One of them is what is called multi-level security, right? And also called MLS, okay? So in multi-level security, which was developed in the context of military systems, right? So the idea is that every object has some sort of a level or a secrecy level, right? And these levels correspond to points in a lattice, right? So what is a lattice? A lattice is basically a partial order, but particular type of partial order where you have one unique minimum element and a maximum element. The particular lattice that we are going to use is one that has 4 points where you have so you have the top secret here, and then next is secret, then there is, classified and unclassified. So these are the 4 points. So unclassified is the lowest level of secrecy, and top secret is the highest level of secrecy. So the similar to, so this is the level that's assigned to objects such as files. And similarly, you also assign a clearance level to subjects, right? So subjects, again, inherit this typically from the user. And so the subject is associated with the clearance level. And what you're going to say is that a subject can access an object only if their clearance level is at or above the object clearance. So for instance, if I have a secret clearance, that means I can access the secret documents, I can access classified documents, and I can access unclassified documents. Okay, so as a practical matter, information is also compartmentalized. So this is, the lattice kind of has a vertical ordering of information. So where the highest level corresponds to highest level of secrecy. Now, there can also be a horizontal partitioning depending upon what somebody is doing. So if somebody is working on missiles, then they have information related to missiles. If somebody is working on nuclear weapons, then they have access to that type of information. So that this kind of horizontal partitioning, which is called compartmentalization, is used in addition to this kind of vertical ordering. And so, but then what we are going to talk about here is mainly about this vertical ordering. So a particular type of MLS is called the Bell-LaPadula model, which was developed in the context of the Multics operating system in the 1970s. Okay, so the goal of this is to ensure that sensitive information does not leak, right? So once again, we have this ordering of for objects. So we have top secret, secret, classified, and unclassified. Okay, and then subjects also have a corresponding level. So let's take a subject, and let's say the subject has a secrecy level or a clearance level, which is, let's say, secret. Okay, which means that it is permitted to read this, the secret information, because once again, its clearance level is at or above that. So it can read classified, and it can also read unclassified information. Okay. Now, no write down basically says that an entity can only write to information that is at its level or at a higher level, which means that in terms of writing, it can write to secret or it can write to top secret. And you can see now that if you follow the arrows, you can see that these arrows can only take information up in the lattice, which means that lower level of secrecy, information at a lower level of secrecy can find its way into information of higher level secrecy, but you are not going to have a situation where something at a higher level of secrecy ends up at a lower level. Okay, so this means that you are not going to have information leaking to people who don't have corresponding clearance. So for instance, if you have another subject prime, which can only access classified information, you can easily see that anything that the this subject, which has clearance for secret information, whatever it writes, it's going to be either at the secret level or top secret level. And therefore, this subject, which is operating at the classified level, will never be able to read that information. Okay, so this is what the so-called star property ensures that information, sensitive information, will never leak. Okay, now this Bell-LaPadula model is looking at confidentiality and making sure that the secret information doesn't leak. There is also a corresponding model which is concerned with integrity. Integrity means trustworthiness of some piece of information. And in the case of integrity, the policy kind of operates in the opposite direction. That is, you are allowed to, you are not allowed to read down. Okay, so to understand this, let's also talk about a lattice here, but we'll talk about just 2 points. So there is, low integrity, and then there is high integrity. Okay, and let's say there is a subject that is whose clearance is at low, right? So that this means the subject's integrity is low, which means that it can read, both high and low integrity information, but when it writes, it cannot go up, which means that the writing is permitted only to low. So once again, if you follow then you are going to have information go from so you can see that the information is going to go from high to low. Okay, but it cannot go from low to high. Okay, now if you consider a different subject, okay, subject prime, then the subject prime may be at a high level of integrity, and in this case it will not be permitted to read low integrity data. So it can only read this way, but it can write to both the high integrity and low integrity. Okay, and once again, if you follow the arrows, you can see that you can go from high, and you can go from high to low or high to high, but you cannot go from low to high. So once again, this these two conditions here, no read down and no read down and no write up, make sure that integrity flows from high to low and never from low to high, right? So low integrity information can never pollute high integrity information, but high integrity information can flow into low integrity information. Okay, so this is called the Biba integrity model. And there is a variation of Biba, which is called low watermark policy. And the main difference is that it again enforces these two, no read down and no write up policies. But additionally, what low watermark policy allows is that it allows the subject's integrity to change. Okay, so in what we discussed so far, subject's integrity is fixed at the beginning and it never changes. In the low watermark policy, a subject can start off at high integrity, but then it can move to low integrity. Okay, but it cannot ever go from low to high. Okay, so low watermark simply means that the subject's integrity can be downgraded, when it reads something at a lower level. Okay, so both policies ensure system integrity. Low watermark policy is a little bit more flexible because it does allow the subject's integrity to change. So again, these policies were proposed in the 1970s, and they have found some use in military system, but by and large, they are not part of any operating system today. And the reason is that it's generally difficult to use. And one of the problems is what is called label creep, which we can see if you go back to this example. You can see that as whenever, let's say a subject, operating at a certain level produces a new file, then this new file will get the secrecy associated with the subject, right? So if it's, we said that it can write to objects that are either secret or top secret, but if it creates a new object, then that new object is going to be at a secret level, which means that over time, you're going to create new files that are going to be, further up in this lattice. And so over time, what's going to happen is that everything in this system is going to become secret or top secret. And as a result, anyone who doesn't have the top secret clearance will end up not being able to access much of anything. And so over time, it becomes quite difficult to use the system. There's also a second class of problem, and that has to do with the fact that sometimes you have to support applications. Sometimes their applications have to do something that violates the policy. For instance, let's say you have a top secret document. You may want to send it over the network, and this is perfectly acceptable if you encrypt the document and then send it over the network. But if you simply directly apply the information flow policy, the policy will say the network is not, has low, only unclassified information can go on the network, and therefore you might say that the top secret information should never go out on that. And therefore, what happens is that you have to give special permission to certain programs to say, hey, I know that this program is going to encrypt and send the data, and therefore it's exempted from the star property. But once you exempt it from the star property, then you can never say, whether it's secure or not, because what if there is a bug in this program? Then because of the bug, it may be able to leak all the secret information on the network. So the main problem with this approach is that you have this trusted programs, and trusted programs are completely exempted from any security property, which means the trusted programs can totally destroy the security of the system. And so there has been interest in coming up with alternative approaches where the goal is that instead of saying that trust is all or nothing, you want to make trust granular, right? That is you trust to a certain extent, and you want to sort of set some bounds on this trust. And so this is what we will take up next.